Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
February 24, 2020, the Facebook Caves edition. So Facebook said on Monday that it would restore the sharing and viewing links in Australia after gaining more time to negotiate over a proposed law that would require it to pay news content that appeared on its site. Facebook had blocked news links in Australia last week as the new law neared passage. The legislation includes a code of conduct that would allow media companies to bargain individually or collectively with digital platforms over the values of their news. Facebook had vigorously objected to the code, which would curb its power and drive up its spending for content, as well as set a precedent for other governments to follow. The company had argued that news would not be worth the hassle in Australia if it became law. But Facebook caved in. And after several minor concessions, they agreed to everything. This was reported by Mike Isaac and Damien Cave in the New York Times. And I'm sure other governments will take note of this, and this will be the new reality for Facebook going forward. Next up from the Washington Post, ERCOT, the Texas Energy Board, as board members have started to resign. 5 members of the organization resigned in the wake of the persistent blackouts caused by storms that blanketed the state with very cold temperatures last week. The 16-member board has been under criticism for days because several members live out of state and obviously weren't affected by the power outages and really have no stake in anything ERCOT does except collect money from the great state of Texas. So good to see some movement there. Next up from Dylan Tokar over at the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal, the SFO says it wants companies to invest in compliance. It's taken steps to emphasize the need for companies to invest in compliance programs and procedures designed to prevent wrongdoing. The focus on the strength of the company's compliance programs is a new one for the SFO, and it is they want to make sure that compliance is part of the company's DNA. Or they just adorn a couple of nice blinders that are held on a bookshelf so you don't have to do much more than that. This will be significant if a company gets into trouble and is prosecuted by the SFO. So it's going to be interesting to see if real credit is given and if UK companies will wake up, smell the roses, and start to do something around this issue. And finally, what's in your supply chain? Well, President Biden is readying an executive order to bolster critical supply chains. The order is intended to start an effort to insulate U.S. companies from further shortages of critical imported components. As reported in the New York Times, this will include manufacturing industries, including automobiles, pharmaceuticals, and clean energy. The order will not target imports from any specific country, but is widely seen as the next step in an effort to counter the economic rise of China and to promote factory growth in the United States. Obviously, the Buy America component of the Biden economic policy is a part of this, and given the missteps from the Trump administration to cut off the American nose to spite its face with China, they didn't consider what would happen in the supply chain. So these steps are not only welcome, but unfortunately are necessary because of the complete FUBARs from the Trump administration. And I hope that more American companies will buy from American suppliers. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.